Okay, so now the recording has started. Hi, Pike. How are you? Oh
Uh,
my God, he yelled.
I didn't yell, I groaned, but
Oh,
okay, buddy.
yeah, but you did it
I guess
loudly.
well, sometimes you don't hear my groans, sometimes you do, and I just gotta make sure everyone at home can hear them. Otherwise, how do they know I exist?
True,
Hmm?
true. All right. I'm just gonna let you believe that for now. So we are on episode 4. I almost said episode 3, but this is episode 4 of DS9, and
Yes.
it is titled "A Man Alone." So, we're gonna start doing this now. What would you say is just the average quality of this episode? Because I remember saying it was about a B plus.
I put it as sort of a B myself. Like it's a B. Now, whether it's a B or a B plus, that's where you're gonna argue. Like it's a good episode for who it focuses on. Um, like in terms like I my only real issue is, me just being like modern sensibilities. If you have an A plot and a B plot, they best resolve together in a satisfying way. Now, if you have them and they resolve together and they don't satisfy, bad. If you have them and they resolve without each other but they do it well, less bad, but still, could be better. But that's my only gripe with this episode. They kind of are separate stories altogether, and it's one of those things like at any point you could split these two stories apart in the episode. But one of these plot lines is really good for one of the characters in terms of his characterization, and the other one establishes something that sets up for the rest of the season and a good part of the series, um, which is namely the school situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we'll probably get into that, but we start off on a. So how do you feel about these like cold opens for Star Trek? Because sometimes they're just weird. I don't know if I like them.
I So, to make sure I understand what you mean by cold open, like where it's just like, hey, we have this situation, and do you mean specifically it
You
doesn't lead into
Well,
the
no.
main story?
Usually a cold open is there's no intro sequence to an episode. They don't have
Okay.
like they don't have like the title card, which a lot of these episodes do. But this one in particular is just it's just two characters interacting in a strange way.
Yeah, Julian trying to get his dick wet. Julian
All right,
just,
and I gotta make
being
sure to
himself.
take off the monetized thing. Thank you. So what I was going to say is Julian comes into this hollow suite with Jadzia, and he starts flirting with her. She's doing some sort of weird bubble mind game,
Yeah.
and she explains that it is, what does she exactly call it? It is an Altonian brain teaser, and it is a
Uh,
puzzle which doesn't make sense because it's this weird floating bubble. It actually looks like a soap bubble just floating in front of her.
you want to
And
make
she
this
says she
better?
has been
Super
training how to do
bubbles.
it for how long? About 100 years at least.
Uh, 140 years.
Yeah,
That's what the transcript
she's
said.
been trying to learn how to do it for 140 years. Remember, she's a trill. She has multiple lifetimes, essentially locked inside
Yeah,
this parasite that lives inside her. I know they call it a symbiote, but I call it a parasite. And
it's a parasol.
and then Julian comes in. He says some flirtatious things. She offers he can try the brain teaser. Julian's a smart guy, probably a little bit proud of his intelligence. He immediately tries it and it pops the puzzle. I guess that's the
Right.
fail state for the puzzle. And
Yeah.
she kind of like teases him. It's like, oh, good luck next time. And he sort of asks her if she's free for supper. She says that she gets a call from Cisco, or Cisco enters the scene, asks if she's ready for something. I guess they were previously going to do, and leaves
Yeah.
Julian alone. He restarts the puzzle and tries again, which we know something about Julian that has not been revealed.
Mm,
And I find it interesting how this sort of like shows off because he tries this brain teaser immediately again. And I think there's, depending on if you know the reveal later on for him or not, this says two separate things about his character. Do you think
hmm
we should just reveal what it is? I don't really think it's a big deal if we spoil it. If someone really cares about this really old show, like I don't think it changes too much.
Yeah, like it's a neat thing to go forward aware of and be like, oh, like, you
Yeah,
know what? I'm just gonna spoil it.
yeah. Go ahead.
He's genetically enhanced. He is like illegally
He's a
genetically enhanced.
he's a Khan from Wrath of Khan. He's a person who, Khan was a genetically enhanced super soldier, or kind of a super soldier. He was just genetically enhanced, and their people became
And
soldiers.
then became dictator.
Yeah,
Then
and
became
there was the eugenics wars of Earth, and genetic modification of humans outside of necessary things is illegal. So I assume if you're going to develop some sort of genetic cancer, they're allowed to genetically alter you to remove that. That's fine, but enhancing
right.
physical and mental capabilities is illegal. Julian has super intelligence to the point where his brain functions, I think, around the level of like a supercomputer. He's faster than the computer sometimes at solving problems
Yeah.
that we see later on in the series. Now, there's a lot of debate on how far this was really kind of considered. I think there's at least some signs that Julian is super, like, beyond super intelligent. And the reason I want to bring it up in this scene is we get like a little
Maybe
bit
you'd
of an
like to try
interaction where
again.
she sort of says, "Hey, keep trying it again," and he sort of looks sad because his romantic attempts failed, but he asks the computer to restart the puzzle, and he has this like kind of
Doctor?
determined look on his face. It's hard to kind of get that look
Yeah.
on the screen. But one thing I like to consider is if we don't consider the what some people kind of call a retcon, what I kind of just call a changing character partway through the series, if we don't consider the fact that he's genetically mutated, this kind of shows how determined he is to try and get to Jadzia, or get her romantically. He knows
Yeah.
that she has been trying to do this for 140 years. She's a markedly intelligent person. So for him to have any ability to do this would probably be impossible were he not genetically modified. The fact that he's willing to keep trying kind of shows that he is at least trying to maybe impress her. Maybe if he gets further along, he'll impress her. It's something that she seems engaged with, so he wants to try it out himself. That says
Yeah.
maybe more about him wanting, a romantic relationship with her. Whereas if we do consider the fact that he's genetically engineered, I could definitely see the scene going longer, and he just immediately solves it because we know he's that intelligent.
So I think the reason why I don't necessarily know if he would immediately or
He'd get
like
really close. He'd do a lot better than he did here. It doesn't even seem Jadzia had
yeah.
mastered it after 140 years. But I guess like what I mean is, with how intelligent we know he can be, like I feel like that almost changes the scene a little bit, which is kind of an interesting read, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the reason why I don't think it would necessarily be like he solves it immediately is just because what she describes is like it has something to do with your theta brainwaves, right? And I'm just thinking like how often do you deliberately like even in the sci-fi, Star Trek future, how often do you actually think about your your theta brainwaves and using them to do this? It's like I don't
I don't know.
I think this is something
I think
it's
theta,
one of
if
the
I
things
recall,
like
theta brainwaves are the like they're not the subconscious, but there's something in between, like the transition between conscious and subconscious. If I recall correctly from my one small stint in a psychology class, but
uh
it's basically like you need to almost control this on a subconscious level,
mhm.
which would obviously be something you can't like you could I guess train yourself to control. But anyway, it's a silly little alien puzzle. It's a silly little sci-fi gimmick for the start of this episode. I just find it kind of interesting depending on how you interpret that ending based on what we
Mhm.
know now of the character and what we learn later. Because I
Mhm.
like to at least think about the idea, okay, if we interpret Bashir as always being incredibly intelligent, that scene changes a little bit. That is now instead of him trying to learn this puzzle to in one day hopes of wooing Jadzia or you know any sort of thing like that. He's actually quite intelligent and he wants to solve it as a problem, knowing that he probably could, given his intelligence. And
Mhm.
another thing that's incredibly important for the fact that he is a genetic mutant is he's not allowed to reveal that. That's actually illegal for him to be that, and his parents would be arrested. He might actually be removed from Starfleet because they don't want to encourage
Yeah.
that sort of thing. There's a lot to sort of discuss about the matter of genetically engineered individuals in Star Trek, and we're going to get a lot more of that later. We get, I think, at least 3 or 4 episodes of that later in the series where he deals with other genetically modified people.
Mhm.
But yeah, so I mean that's just mostly the cold open. It's not like super in depth, and it doesn't really have too much to do with the overall story. It's just a fun little character
Yeah.
interaction, I suppose, that shows a little bit about Bashir's character, a little bit about. I don't really know if it shows too much about Jadzia's character, other than she's a little bit of a tease. She doesn't
Yeah,
outright she doesn't outright reject Julian, and kind of in that first episode, she has some level of interest in him. She's not outright saying no, but she's not saying yes, and she keeps pushing him away, saying, "I'm a trill. I'm like 100. I'm like 300 and something years old." It's like, well, then sit him down and tell him you don't actually want to date him. But I think the
Yeah.
the non symbiote part of her probably still finds him attractive and, someone she would date.
Yeah.
The symbiote part of her is like, probably not. So maybe that's something they're trying to go with. But
So
as a result, it kind of ends up her being a little bit of a tease to Bashir. Not necessarily in a negative way. It's just that's just how she's interacting with him. She's not outright telling him no, but at the same time, she's not outright telling him yes.
I think it's a case of the symbiont. The symbiont is just like either or, like, I could take it or leave it. And it's like, remember, the goal of each host is for new experiences and such. And let's be fair, this might be her first taste of human. Okay, okay. So, new experience,
Sure, yeah,
but
fair.
uh, but back to your original question about like what do I think of cold opens? I'm kind like I'm generally of the opinion like they're fine. Like my sort of thing of like I generally want a cold open to then lead into the main plot, if that makes sense. Because like it
Well,
like
it kind of
so let's
functions. It kind of functions as a trying to get you into the setting. But I'm not gonna lie, based on what we see in the next scene, I think the next scene would have made a probably better cold open. I guess like that's why I
uh
sort of bring it up here. The next scene is Odo in
yeah,
Quark's bar, and
yeah,
we
like
see sort
this
of
should be
we see a very sort of distinct like we get a good character interaction between two different people. We also get a little bit of
well
plot stuff.
let me finish my thoughts
Oh,
here.
okay.
For like my sort of like issue is like this is a great cold opener for a Julian episode. Like, hey, we're gonna be dealing with because it's like, hey, he
Mm-hmm.
he had this moment and he's like, especially if we made that change that you suggested of like if it went further, it's like but if it's something examining Julian, this would be a good cold opener. But the problem is this isn't a Julian episode. This is, spoilers, it's an Odo episode. And technically a when we call it a Keiko episode, Keiko's not really like a spotlight character ever. This is like one of the closest points.
I
Like
mean,
she
like I
gets
would say it's a sort of mixed Keiko O'Brien. We get
yeah,
a lot of the scenes that involve the Keiko plotline are almost a little bit more O'Brien's the lead actor in that scene sort of deal. He's the one who
yeah,
goes to Cisco. But yeah, we'll get into that because the next scene is we are in Quark's bar. We see our favorite comedic duo, Odo and Quark, having a conversation. Odo is talking about how you're almost making an honest living of yourself here, Quark. I mean, we've said it before. I really do love the interaction between these two. Odo is constantly saying things that are almost accusatory towards Quark, and Quark just keeps almost brushing them off. It's a game to them,
yeah.
and we're gonna get a lot of stuff. I think in this episode where we see kind of Quark's character and how and how that progresses. But
Mhm.
at the same time, while they're having a conversation, they hear an argument on the second floor between O'Brien and Keiko. We're not really sure what they're arguing about. We only get like bits and pieces. O'Brien says like,
Yeah,
we made this decision together. Keiko's like, not true. That's not true. You decided and asked me to agree with it. We don't really know the whole situation there, but Quark comments, "Oh, word is they're having some sort of fight, so it's been going on for a while." And Odo comments he's never understood the humanoid need to couple. Again, Odo's this weird, like, liquid creature that can shapeshift and change. He doesn't see a need for a romantic partnership. Quark makes a joke, "Oh, you've never coupled?" Like, asking him if he's ever had sex.
yeah.
And Odo's
Uh,
basically just like, "I've chosen not to. Too many compromises." It seems the way it's worded, it's almost like Quark is asking it in a more intimate nature, whereas Odo's actually just
mhm.
referring to the relationship aspect of it. And
Yeah,
Odo
and
looks at
he's
it from the
not.
most. Oh, go on, go on.
Go ahead. Like, say what
Yeah, I was just gonna
aspect
say
of it.
Odo looks at it from a very clinical perspective. Too many compromises. Too many or too few like things that you want to do together. He brings up the example of you want to watch a Caro Net tournament. She wants to listen to music, so you compromise. You listen to music, and he's kind of making the same joke that when a husband and wife have an argument, the wife wins.
The wife. Yeah, and it's like weirdly like because it's like if I were to hear like Odo say like I've never understood this need to because he opens with the humanoid need to couple.
Yeah.
So I would think like, oh, so this is gonna come from his perspective as a changeling. This is just like a typical like tough gruff man situation like instead and it's like it makes sense he is like the hard-boiled sort of like sheriff slash detective of the station but it's just like oh I was expecting like some but it is the fourth only the fourth episode so we
Well, I mean,
don't
he
know
might understand like the organic need to reproduce. Obviously, like if you ask him, like, well, they need kids. He'd be like, well, okay, sure. Like you need to pass on that sort of
Hmm.
thing. But he specifically, I guess, talks about coupling, right? So the idea of two people form a relationship together and they work together to raise a family, sort of deal. That seems to be a little bit more of what he's referring to.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, he's looking at it as like an animal who, just like they
well,
make the kid and then
he doesn't see
they
the need
go.
for the personal reaction. Kind of like what you were saying. He doesn't see the need for that personal intimacy between people. Odo keeps himself
Mhm.
distant from a lot of individuals, and he more or less doesn't see the desire to compromise how he lives to benefit someone else.
Mhm.
And I don't know. I guess it's kind of interesting considering what we know of his person. Again, we later know he comes from a species that's sort of a gigantic pool of almost like a single entity that can split off into smaller entities, and he's a split off version of a smaller entity. So,
Right.
like for him, there's no couples. There's only one. There's only the. It's I don't want to say collective because that has sort of connotations to the Borg in this setting, but there is the collective.
There is the
Yeah, there's
there
the
is the singular that becomes the many.
yes, and right now he just. I guess he still has that mentality. He's still very much a. I think have we gotten any interactions between him and Kira? Because him and Kira have a decent friendship. We got one last episode with her asking, like they had a conversation, about pretense
She
and
was
the nature of
confident.
her. She's unsure of what she wants to do, but you can clearly tell that the way it was written, the way it was acted, these two have some sort of not romantic relationship, but a friendship, a good relationship
Yeah.
between each other, working relationship. So it's interesting to hear this perspective from him now. Again, the fight between Keiko and O'Brien explodes a little bit more. Keiko walks away, and then we sort of learn the nature of this. If we recall that O'Brien was transferred here, and as his wife, Keiko's going to go with him. So they
Right.
left the Enterprise to come here. She doesn't like it. If I recall, she is a botanist or like a
Yeah, she's a boss.
it's xenobotanist or something like some sort of sci-fi version of that.
She works with plants. She works with plants. That's all you really need to know. Like she researches them, and by like necessity at this point, you're kind of by necessity a xenobiologist. But in everyday parlance, you would just say like, "Oh, I'm a botanist," because at this point, when everyone's like out amongst the stars, it's like, well, do we really need to make that distinction at that point in terms of like when it comes to plants?
Sure.
Like,
I
not
guess I just wanted to be a little bit more clear about what is it that she specifically does. Is she a researcher or is she someone who actually cultivates these things? It sounds like her complaint is mostly along the realm of she doesn't actually get to cultivate any of these. I think at one point in the episode, O'Brien offers to try and get Cisco to turn one of the unused hangar bays into a greenhouse sort of thing. That ends up not
hmm
being really the solution Keiko wants. Part of, and we'll kind of learn about it later. Keiko's kind of feels a little bit lost. She doesn't really have a purpose on this station. O'Brien does. O'Brien has a very important purpose on the station. He basically fixes everything, but she doesn't really have a
right.
purpose, and she kind of feels a little bit lost in that. I do actually kind of like their conflict because it feels very realistic. She's just trying to do what she's just trying to find some purpose for herself. O'Brien wants her to be happy, but he can't give her a purpose.
Right.
Every time he tries to help her, she kind of gets more mad because what she wants ultimately is to be able to take control for herself. And it's not evaluated this deeply, but I do like the conflict because I can kind of see it. I see it be very realistic in how they treat it. She doesn't want her husband to solve the problem for her because then that doesn't really solve her problem. She needs to be
hmm
the one that pulls through and does something for herself. Uh,
Yeah.
at this point, we see Dax and or Cisco walk down for coming from the Hollow Suite from the previous scene, and of course, Quark has a fun little comment to say about Dax because I think at this point they make a joke that like everyone is attracted to Dax. Bashir
Yeah.
is,
Besides, like,
Quark is. They even they think that Cisco is interested in her. We kind of later learn that's not really the case, but I guess people can probably interpret that given they're very close. But
right.
that's
Like
Cisco. Yeah,
Dax, like there's obviously the curse on angle of like, oh, this is his old mentor, but basically reborn. But also the fact of like Dax is like, we learn very capable and such. So it's like, if there's anyone amongst the Starfleet personnel he would take on as a confidant and trust. It's like it kind of has to be Dax because Bashir's new and O'Brien's not an officer. No offense to O'Brien, he's
Well,
the greatest.
and Kira is probably her loyalties are a little bit more questionable even after last episode. You know, is she loyal to the
Yeah,
Federation? Is she loyal to Bajor first? It's a little unsure. She's obviously not a traitor, but it's just an issue of if a conflict happens, Jadzia is kind of the
he needs
best.
someone.
Yeah, he's the
Yeah,
person he can
basically,
trust the most.
Kira's the confidant when it's something about like to do with the Bajorans. But if he's just looking at it from a I need to speak for the Federation here, it's like he's gone to Jadzia because Jadzia is someone like he has a personal connection with, and she's probably the most senior person next to him. So
Well,
it's
yeah,
like
but at the same time, it's like two people who are close. She's an attractive woman. People make the assumption. And
yeah.
it's interesting because Quark sort of comments like, well, that doesn't make sense because Cisco knew Dax when she was a he. So, they're old friends. And
Hmm.
then Odo says, things change. Like,
Things
it's,
change.
it's interesting. It seems Odo has a lot of fascination with couples, even though he clearly says that he has no interest in it and doesn't understand it at all. Like,
Yeah, for him, it's not being involved. It's like he has to study people both for like his own safety, of like I need to blend in and such. But he does find it fascinating. Like it came up last episode with the pretense thing. Uh, when he was discussing it with Kira, he studies like these species. Because he lives amongst them, and it's just like he doesn't see a value in doing it himself
see,
because it's
I
just
kind of,
like.
I'm actually going to take a little bit of a different interpretation here. I think he really does like the idea of coupling, of getting like being with someone. Again, he is a person who his species like default existence is as one, and then when they split off, they lose I think a little bit of that. So I think even though he doesn't know where he comes from, part of him seeks that sort of companionship. But
Yeah, but he
as
can't.
this as this like perpetual outsider, he is this weird species on the frontier of Federation space. He doesn't really belong anywhere yet, and he sees these couples
Mhm.
and he's almost interested in them. I do like your argument that like, oh, it's about him understanding species and people and how they interact so that he can better do his job. But I also kind of look at it as
Mhm.
he's interested, but he's almost rejecting that idea for himself. It's something that he doesn't see
Mhm.
himself having, so he has this weird fascination. Again, whole comment of things change, like, oh, like maybe they're a couple now. It's like, why would you care? Well, I think he cares because he has a deep seated fascination with couples, and
Mhm.
because part of him doesn't accept that, but part of him wants that, he's in conflict. So maybe that's a characterization thing. Maybe just an offhand comment. Maybe we're reading too much into it. But it's cut off when they hear someone shout at the Dabo table. Odo sees someone that he recognizes. He asks how long the person's been here. He seems fairly panicked at this. And
Yeah.
then it's revealed that this is someone that he knows about. It's
Right.
uh, Quark comments that he came in on a transport last night. I got a picture of it briefly. Quark's face when he's looking at Jedzia is just so creepy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
if you look at 205, his face when he's just like looking up at Jedzia, it's like he really wants her.
Yeah, I'm trying to get to it on my end, but it's just like, I mean, are we that surprised?
No, he's a hot blooded Ferengi. He wants
Ugh.
he wants
Vera.
oh god, don't talk about that. But yeah, so then we move back to Cisco and Dax. Let's see here. Oh yeah, like Dax wants steamed asna, and Cisco's like, ah, some things are still the same. Apparently, it's something that she always ate, and she comments, it's like, you'd eat it too if you ever listen to me. It'll like add 10 years onto your life if you eat that. But Cisco
Mhm.
kind of comments. This is actually, I think, the first time we learned that his father is a chef, because his father he talks about how the meals my father used to cook when we were children, like they're so much better for him. He doesn't want to live longer if he doesn't get to eat good food. I don't know. I like that as a little sort of a little comment on him. We know later on that he cooks a lot, so it's just nice.
Yeah.
It's a nice little character trait that we know Cisco likes cooking. We know that he loves food. He doesn't care if he dies. Like, he doesn't live to be 140 because they live really long in Star Trek time. Like, some people can live
Yeah.
ridiculously long times. But if he doesn't,
Like, I think Keiko's mom is in her 120s right now because I remember it comes up later. I'm like, oh, I remember being like, what do you mean she's that old?
yeah. Well, I mean, obviously, sci-fi tech would improve so many things, but yes, Dax comments it'll put years on your life, and Cisco sort of just comments. This is where we kind of get the nature of Cisco seems to be having trouble separating Jadzia from Curzon. He sort of comments
Mhm.
because obviously they're going to have a lot of the same traits, but at the same time, Jadzia is her own person,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
Jadzia comments, it's like, this happens to Trills. Sometimes friendships with other species don't survive because of the change. And Cisco says, it won't be that way with us. It'll just be a little uncomfortable right now. And Jadzia sort of comments, I suggest you allow yourself to be comfortable with your discomfort. Time can do the rest. It's a bit of a weird line, but I guess I get what she's trying to say. The idea that there's no way to make this better, it's just something that you have to deal with time.
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah, it's
yeah. And this is when
you
we
can't
see
force it.
yeah, this is when we see that Keiko fully storms out of the thing, and O'Brien is looking sort of desperate. Let's see.
Yeah.
Odo then runs up to Irudon is the guy's name, grabs his arm and says,
Irritant.
Irudon, I don't want you to be on the station. Uh, like there's no reason he can't be Ibudon. There's no reason he can't be there. And Odo sort of says, I decide who has the right and who has rights and who doesn't on the promenade.
There's
That
the
is quite a
fascism,
line
mate.
by Odo.
There's the fascism. There it is. We've done it. Uh, also the smartass response. You better ask your Federation superiors about that one. It's like, I mean, he's right. It- uh, but yeah, it's just like you're gonna see throughout this series, folks, that Odo, like, with time that we've now had to reflect on things, damn, like, holy crap, he's authoritarian. Like, and he has the best of intentions. Like last episode, it's like, if him or that one goal they were trying to put up with, if they had gone their way, the whole plot of the episode would not have been necessary. Like they would have arrested the guy who was like the mastermind immediately.
Well, we kind of
But
discussed it last time with sort of the nature of authoritarianism, and it's just the idea that, the problem with authoritarianism is you don't want people in charge because there's no checks and balances to make sure that they don't abuse their power. Meanwhile, Odo doesn't
right.
really have that perspective. As far as Odo is concerned, as long as he acts like a just person, he should have as much control as he kind of needs. I think we
Mhm.
get some parts later on in the series where his judgment goes into question and he intentionally foregoes power. We actually do see some of that, I think, this episode. But more or less, we know that this Odo seems to really hate this guy. Like, really hates him. There's
Yeah.
a physical altercation. Cisco has to come down. Let's see. Uh, Basically separates the two. Odo screams, like, I don't want you on this station. Let's see. Yeah, and yeah, the altercation seems to end. Odo yells, you have 26 hours to get off the station, which, hey, I think that's the first reference to how long a Bajoran day is, because 26 hours is the time period for days
Yep.
in that system. So I always find that as like an interesting little Star Trek lore. Is like, I guess the primary planet in a system, whatever its time period is, that's just the thing everyone else goes by, because the station isn't orbiting Bajor, so it might actually have a different orbit of the sun, uh, but or not orbit of the sun, but just like I don't know how you would determine a day on a space station other than by the planet of the primary system. So yeah, it's a bit weird, but yeah, we learned. I think this is the first time we learned 26 hours in a Bajorian day.
Hmm.
Let's see, we move back,
Yeah.
and this is where we get a little bit more explanation on the O'Brien and Keiko argument. We kind of touched upon it. She wants some sort of purpose. He's trying to help her get one, but that doesn't help because it wouldn't help if he gave her the purpose. Let's see.
Also,
Yeah, go ahead.
so sorry to get focused on it again, but yeah, the cold open. So we start with Jazia in the hollow suite. Julian comes in. They have their little flirtatious moment. Cisco comes in. I need to take her away. So they go out. We get to the bar scene. Like there's, and then they have their conversation, which isn't then the main. Like it's not a Cisco episode. It's a Jad. Like
Well,
they have their
we can kind of
conversation.
get some stuff with that later on, but
Well, it's
it's a
just
lot of smaller stuff in this episode. There's almost like a C
yeah,
plot. Like if you lump a lot of those smaller things together, I don't have
yeah,
an issue with it. This early on in the series, I think they're really just trying to give a lot of characterization to the individuals. We see some of this in TNG, I
Hmm.
don't know if I have an issue with it, but I just feel that right now it feels a little bit disjointed. Even how we're talking about it, I have to be like, oh, now we're going about two different characters. We're talking about Keiko and O'Brien now. Well, what about the conflict with Odo? It's
Yeah.
like, well, we'll get back to that soon. I'm like, I kind of want more of that now. Like, what's going on with Odo? Like, instead we're focusing on O'Brien and Keiko, which I mean, a lot of people don't like Keiko. I think she probably gets a little bit worse of a rap than necessary. But part of her, she's usually only ever brought in when there's a conflict between her and O'Brien, and people like O'Brien.
Yeah.
So when they see that conflict, their first thought is, well, Keiko's kind of being unreasonable. It's like I don't think she's being unreasonable here. It's just it's
Yeah,
unfortunate.
like
Yeah, go on.
so like I Hollis, you're aware, audience, I'm a military brat, technically speaking, and I know people who have been military brats, a lot of military people in my family. This is a common thing that comes up with like spouses. They're basically like, if they go to wherever their significant other is stationed, it's like, well, what are you gonna do with your time besides just being a homemaker? Now, if you're fine being a homemaker or whatever, hey, it works out. But in the case of Keiko, it's like this is pretty reasonable for Keiko. Just like I think there's like some parts where like individual things she says can be like a bit unfair, but she always backs it up like like saying that she's unfair and she wants to do better. Like this is like Keiko. I think the reason why people like as you said, is whenever we see her, it's a conflict that involves O'Brien. There's not oftentimes like things that focus on Keiko and like isn't some sort of conflict that O'Brien tries to solve because uh as a comparison, there was an episode in TNG that focused on Beverly, right? The
Yeah.
doctor. uh, okay, sorry, just making sure you're still alive. Where it's basically her having to solve like the situations she's in, and you get a whole other perspective on things because this is the head doctor and not like the chief science officer. This is the chief medical officer having to like figure out in her own way what she needs to do, why this is happening and such. And that's very good to show like Beverly's perspective on things because it's like, oh, she's no longer the medical officer they just bring in, or she's no longer just the mom to Wesley,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
We see, but we never get that with Keiko because all her things are things that O'Brien is trying to solve because O'Brien's part of the crew, she's not, and we're focused on the crew, the people who run the station.
Well, I also think
Like,
to talk a little bit more about the relationship. One line I think might get some criticism is again she's this botanist, and O'Brien's offering like they're going to be sending runabouts through the wormholes. You're going to be the first person to get to see gamma quadrant plants and stuff like that. I'm not going to lie. If I was a botanist and I wanted some sort of purpose, that's a phenomenal opportunity. But all she kind of really says is, I don't want any favors from you. I just need to feel useful. I'm like, I get that like there's this element of you want to find some purpose for yourself. You don't want your husband to give you purpose. I get that. But you're also,
mhm.
this is probably really the first big marriage we've seen on Star Trek when it comes
Yeah, and
to
they don't
a
know.
functioning couple. Well, I'm just sort of saying that should be what a relationship is. It's like, hey, yeah, your husband helps you in this circumstance, and you accept the help because you married the guy. But I think that's just it's tough to kind of understand this, but it's a complicated relationship. Each character is a character in and of themselves. Keiko's not just O'Brien's wife, right? She has a
Right.
character, she has a purpose, she has stuff she wants to do, and I think the series also kind of struggles because this is really probably the first marriage relationship we get any sort of depth in Star Trek. So they're probably trying to feel around for how they need to characterize these people with in the greater terms of Star Trek. And I do want to lean into it because it leads to a very weird line. So part of her conflict is they have a daughter, and there is sort of a question about raising the daughter on the space station. So they're standing on the second level of the promenade. Keiko looks down, and you see Jake walking in throughout the promenade. Now Jake, being Cisco's
Log,
son,
right?
we know he's probably a good kid. He's the son of the commander, And the line she
Mhm.
says is, "Do you really want to raise your kids in a place like this, or do you really want to raise your daughter in this place?" As she looks at the black child walking on the first floor of the promenade, I'm like,
Yeah,
"Whoa, Keiko, hold up there."
30 years later, this shot is a little awkward
Well, I
because
don't even know what it's
we
supposed to mean
know
here. She's looking at the commander's son and says, "Do you really want to raise your kid here?" She's obviously thinking about children because she sees, a kid being raised on the station. I just find it's
he's
a
just
very
running.
weird. It is an incredibly awkward cut. It is like,
No, 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 I know what she's getting at because this is like part of her plot here. So she wants to like make sure these kids aren't just running loose wild, like with nothing to do.
yeah,
And she sees Jake, who is the son of the commander, who should be like, the one sort of like, you know how it is. It's like, oh, you're the commander's son, you should be better behaved than this, right?
yeah, but
Which
he's
is
just walking around. He's not doing anything. I guess maybe he's walking around in the middle of the day and he should be in school or something. I don't know how
yeah,
because I don't really know how schooling really works in the Star Trek universe. We don't get too much in terms of details on that. I mean, Wesley seemed to be doing just random stuff throughout the Enterprise
well, yeah,
sometimes.
but he was a weird child in terms of
Well, yeah,
like
that's a different issue with Wesley Crusher. But here, it's just like you see, it's just an awkward cut. Do you really want to raise your daughter in a place like this? Looks at the kid walking around the promenade. It's like, are you specifically targeting Jake that you don't like him or something? And it's
what's
just,
Jake do to you?
yeah. What did Jake do to you? If anything, like I don't know. If I saw
Like a dog.
if I saw the commander's son walking around unattended on the space station, I think things are pretty good. The commander's not worried. He's fine letting his kid walk around. So, I
Yeah.
mean, I imagine you'd expect, like, Cisco's, generally a pretty stand up guy. He's a commander, so there's some level of responsibility and intelligence among that in him. So if he just lets his kid wander around the station, clearly it's a safe station, right? Again, it's a weird cut. It ties into the greater plot for Keiko in this episode where she founds like the school on the station. It's just a weird cut, and like
Hmm.
even back then, I would have said that's very weird. If I looked at just a random like kid walking down the street and it's like, "Oh, I wouldn't want to raise my daughter on this station," it's like, whoa, do you have something against that kid? Do you have something against some of the
Immediately
people here? What's up?
classified.
Like, if you
What's
just
wrong?
think of it this way: imagine if it was a group of Bajorans walking around and she said that.
Oh
Like
god,
that would
that
immediately be like, whoa, Keiko's a little bit racist. But now
red flag right there.
I don't think she is. I think it's just an awkward cut. It's just kind of funny. I remember we commented on it thinking like, oh my god, Keiko, what the hell? But yeah, so I
Uh,
mean that's more or less like what we get from that scene because then we get the boys. We drop down on the promenade and we see Nog buying a what are they called? Donja sticks or something?
John, fuck, what? Oh god, hang on, let me get the transcript from like the end of the season. I know, transcript. Fuck, what's the last episode of the season called? In the Hands of the Prophet. I know it's there. Just talk for now while I
Yeah,
look
well,
this up, please.
he got some sort of weird treat from the confection stand, and I'm not gonna lie, it's hard to see. It looks like a frozen tongue. We later learn
Yeah.
it's some sort of weird Bajoran fruit that you freeze and put on a stick, and then it's like a
It-
good like popsicle sort of thing. But I'm not gonna lie, it looks like a giant tongue, and you see people get these all the time here. Like
yeah, it's
they'll
a
walk up to
jump
the
cut.
thing, grab this tongue-looking treat, and just start licking it, and I'm just like, okay, that's weird. I don't really know. We also have in this setting like Klingons who eat like live worms, gok
Ooh.
as it's called. So like if you told me, oh yeah, this is some sort of weird Bajoran animal that they cut off its tongue and put it on a stick, I'd be like, I mean, I don't disbelieve you, but that's gross. And
Oh god, that reminds me. Ferengis eat tube grubs, and they
yes,
like
they
them
also eat
alive.
tube grubs. They eat live tube grubs. So aliens eat weird stuff here. So when I see them eat like lick this giant tongue thing, I don't know what to think.
Yeah,
But
but it's
apparently
called a
it's apparently just a fruit of some kind.
well, it's the jumjo stick made from the
Jumbo.
sap of the jumjo tree.
Yeah,
So,
so
yeah.
it's a lot less gross. I thought it was a giant tongue when I would watch the show originally. I don't know what it was, but anyway, we get the first interaction between Jake and Nog, two characters that become really good friends. And one of these characters I like kind of a lot. One of these characters I don't think is given a lot of their a lot of good screen time. I don't think they're brought to their full potential. But
Hmm.
we see a small interaction. It's interesting because Nog wants kind of nothing to. No, Jake is just looking for a friend to hang out with. Nog doesn't want
Yeah.
anything to do with him. What do you want, human? And
Come on.
Jake is just trying to be a nice guy, and Nog is just kind of pushing him away. But eventually, Nog does relent. He's like, "Nog, my name's Nog," and then he walks away. It's the first budding. It's the first scene for a budding friendship. I don't know. I like it. And then we immediately get back to Odo. He's sort of explaining who Ibudan is. He says that he ran a black market goods through here during the Cardassian occupation. He would,
Some Bajorans respected him, but Odo's seen him let like a child die because, like, oh, you didn't pay me to save her life. I don't care.
yeah, I mean,
It's
Odo,
like,
again, this is kind of Odo's very strict view of justice, very strict view of even people. He looks at people as probably good or bad, and there's not much in between. Whereas, this guy, he was a smuggler, he helped Bajorans, but he did it for personal gain. So there's an element of, is he a bad person? Is he a good person? Odo seems pretty convinced he's a bad guy. And Cisco,
yeah,
and he wants basically this guy to actually. He says he went away for a few years, because he was caught by a
because he shot
Cardassian
at Cardassian.
officer who wanted to pay off to look the other way. He went. Oh no, I'm sorry. He went to prison for murder, and because Odo sent him there. Cisco's
Well,
like,
so yeah, he shot the Cardassian officer who wanted to pay off. He went to prison because Odo caught him and sent him there. But I don't think that's why Odo doesn't like him because I think it's like short. Well, he probably wouldn't like him for that, but because Odo brings up letting the child die, I think that's what like pisses Odo off. Of like, oh, this guy people hail him as a hero, but he's just like there's not even a case of like circumstantial good. Like, so you know how Quark is like, even if he's a shady, no good scoundrel, there are moments where Quark will help people
yeah,
and just like, and that's not the case with this guy. This guy's just like, if I don't see the profit in it, I don't care. Let that kid die.
yeah.
It's
I mean that's
yeah,
somewhat true. Again, I think this mostly just goes to how Odo views justice, because part of the issue is this guy seems to have been released from prison because killing a Cardassian officer isn't much of a crime according to the Bajoran provisional government, which again we know
yeah.
why Bajorans don't like Cardassians a lot. So I think Odo is, again, this very strict view of justice. This man did something that was wrong. He deserves to be in prison. The provisional government says, we don't really care. This guy saved a lot of Bajorans, and he killed a Cardassian. To us, that's not a crime, so we're releasing him, or he was released. And, to Cisco, it's like, look, until he does something, there's not much we can do about it. And Odo basically is like, look, I can get him off my promenade. Cisco basically says, like, if he hasn't done anything wrong, we can't just arbitrarily force him to leave. And Odo challenges Cisco, is like, watch me. And
You're
Cisco,
not.
yeah, this is where we get a pretty big conflict between the two, because Odo and Cisco are basically coming to blows here, saying like, you're not going to take the law into your own hands. And then Odo has this line: the law, Commander. Laws change depending on who's making them. Cardassians one day, Federation the next. But justice is justice, and as long as I'm in charge of security. So this is where we kind of get this nature of Odo definitely views justice above the law, and yeah, sure, that might be a good thing, but he's kind of the one who seems to be the arbiter of justice in a lot of these circumstances, which that's the more questionable part of his personality. I like it. I like it as part of his character. But, Cisco then sort of threatens him, if you can't work within the rules, I'll find someone who can. So,
Right, because Cisco's about like
yeah, they're
keeping
about the
the
Federation.
peace.
They have rules and regulations and standards, and to them, something like the Prime Directive. I know that's not really relevant here, but the whole point of the Prime Directive is we have this rule that we follow that helps make sure that we make the correct decisions. Even if the outcome isn't the best one, as long as we're following the rules, we're trying to maintain a semblance of security and civilization in an uncivilized like galaxy. Whereas with Odo, as far as he's concerned, as long as I'm in charge, I can just decide what justice is and make sure that it's fulfilled. That is not something
Because
that most people would not agree with, that because I don't know who this guy is, and I don't really agree with his sense of justice. So,
right, because it's just one person's point of view on justice. How do we know? Like, people, just so you know, if anyone ever grandstands and says like I have the right ideas, don't believe them. They're a charlatan. Just ignore them.
no, I have
Just
the right ideas. Trust me. I have the
no,
right
you
ideas.
don't. Politics. Oh my
Put me in charge and give me political power. This is definitely not a
I
bad
will
idea.
make You are not going to make a utopia. You'll make a utopia for yourself, but not for everyone else.
All right. Well,
God.
outside of that great little thing, we have a we cut to the hollow suite where we see Ubudon getting a massage from some sort of weird, I guess, a hologram lady, and then we see
Yeah.
someone come into the scene and stab a knife into his back. Ibudon is dead. So
Yep.
right after the scene, you're kind of supposed to be questioning who's doing this, and let's see. We don't get too much on that right now because we move to the promenade. But basically, what happens is Ibudon's murdered, and Odo and the Federation crew are basically going to be trying to investigate who did this murder. And Odo ends up being kind of a suspect, mostly because he
Yep.
doesn't like this guy. And if I guess the way you're supposed to look at it from how it's presented is Odo has a sense of what is right and wrong. If he's not allowed to do it, he will maybe push for that in a different way, and in this case, killing the man. But
Yeah.
we're gonna later learn how that really works out. We get another
Yeah.
scene with Jake Nog, and Bashir is in there now. Let's see what exactly were they doing here. Oh
They
yeah,
have
Nog.
those little bugs.
Yeah, Nog and Jake are actually seem to be friendly now. They have these weird little bugs that they're using against people, which I guess just cause them to change colors randomly. Like they're gonna basically
Yeah.
unleash these bugs on people and just make them change colors. Which, okay, sure. I guess that's kind of a prank. Let's see. Yeah, what were you about to say?
I remember watching this, and every time I'm watching, I'm like, what do you like? Once it's over, and they're like, oh, we're fine. They're just like, oh, it's fine. It's like, if how if you were in that situation with your significant other, if that happens, it's like you would immediately be like, I don't care if it's technically over. I'm going to a doctor.
Oh
Like
yeah. So
that,
like,
that
because the scene happens is like a man and woman are like having like dinner or lunch at the Replomat, and suddenly they start changing colors. It's almost comical because the woman just like stands up and yells, "Help us!" The man's like, "Somebody help us!" And then before they're like, "Get a doctor!" And then suddenly they stop changing colors and they just sit back down in their seats and go back to their lunch. And you're like,
yeah.
so are you guys probably should go to the doctor. Go see
Yeah.
someone about this because that's weird. And it's a weird sort of situation. Jake and Nog are basically immediately picked up by one of the security personnel. Keiko sees this, and this kind of fuels Keiko having some sort of idea about what she needs to do going forward. Uh,
Yeah. There's
intercut,
also a
yeah, intercut with this. There's a
yeah.
scene with Bashir and Dax again, which again, this does kind of go to what you were saying. There's a lot of just random little scenes here. Like we got a scene with Nog and Jake, and then we get a scene with Jadzia and Bashir, and then we go back to Nog and Jake. It's like, okay, what am I supposed to be watching here? It's a little weird. But Bashir's basically jealous. He walks up behind Dax, and he's just like, so I hear I have competition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, to be fair, if you had to compete with Commander Cisco, like, come on.
yeah, and then
What are you gonna
she sort of comments, Trill find romance quite a nuisance. Uh, let's see. Oh yeah, this is where Dax basically comments that Jadzia is attracted to Julian, but that the sort of Dax symbiote, greater consciousness of the two individuals mixed together is against the idea. So it's really weird. Like
Yeah.
we're gonna have another episode coming up soon about Jadzia, and I'm gonna have a lot to say on the nature of the symbiotes because I am not a big fan. I am not a big fan of the Trills and how they sort of operate. I think there's a lot of questionable things in how that works out.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, after Jake and Nog are taken away by the security, Keiko sees this happen, and this is where Keiko gets the idea that she wants to start a school. Well, actually, no. Then we get the scene where they actually find the murder body. But we'll talk about the one with the school because that's a little bit further ahead. At least finish that plot line. So Keiko has the idea. She brings it up to O'Brien. O'Brien, again, super supportive about this. He wants to like help her start a school in the station. And then there's one scene I do like. Again, I'm skipping kind of ahead here, where Keiko is talking with Cisco about the school and how it's going to be very difficult because you have all these cultures in the frontier and how you're not really going to be able to have a school. But Cisco is super on board with it. He's just like, she's asking for some resources, and he's like, I'll give you whatever you need. Like, and she's actually
Yeah.
surprised at how willing he is for this. You were going to say something?
Yeah. Yeah. The reason why we brought this up in the when we watched this before. The reason why Cisco's so down for it is his job is to get the Bajorans basically on like so. There's the higher will of the government to like be a part of the Federation, right? But what about at the grassroots level, like the common people? And this is a great way to do it. You get the kids to invest in it. Like basically, you know, if you can get the kids to like through interacting with each other to adopt from each other, you make them much more willing to, in later generations be like, yeah, it's the Federation. They've always been here,
Yeah, I
right?
mean that's one thing. That's sort of maybe the greater idea. One thing I did like about the scene is just how happy Cisco is the whole time. He's smiling. He's 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 all about like, oh, I'll give you computers, I'll give you desks, I'll give you everything you need, I'll give you a space. And one thing he
Mhm.
does comment is he can't force Bajoran or Ferengi or any other species to join it. Basically, Cisco's like, look, I can make my own kid go, but that's it. And Keiko
Right.
says, like, I know there's gonna be a struggle, but I think it'll be worth it. And then we get a scene where this is a little bit weird. Cisco basically says, like, if I hear you hanging out with that Ferengi boy again, you know. So we get a bit of a
That's like,
weird. We get a little bit of a. It's like, ooh, Cisco doesn't exactly have the best view of Ferengi, which is fair given everything that has happened with the Ferengi. But it's 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 a little bit of it's a little bit of a questionable line, I would actually say. He's like, I don't want you hanging out with that
so
Ferengi boy again. Admittedly,
the best
they
thing to
did
say,
immediately get into some trouble the second they started hanging out. So that is
yeah,
true.
but like the thing that would best be said to Cisco in that moment is there's a later episode that deals with a Cardassian child, and O'Brien says something to the effect of like, I don't know if I want him around our daughter. Uh, and Keiko just says like, that was a very ugly thing you just said. Just yeah, like the way Cisco said that is very like,
Yeah,
maybe don't bring up the Ferengi because we know it's because to Cisco, Nog is a troublemaker,
yeah.
right?
Well,
And that's
we like Jake immediately walks out of the scenes like I thought you didn't want to talk about this now, and I guess the implication is that scene continues on and we get maybe a deeper understanding of it later. But I
Mhm.
know they expand upon that later. I mean, Jake just wants to hang out with like the only kid his age on the station, and
Not
it's like even though he's a Ferengi, but it seems as if Cisco has some sort of maybe preconceived notion about what that would mean. We'll get probably a little bit
right,
more on that with the Keiko plotline going on. But now we're talking about the fact that they found a dead body in the holosuite.
right. And
S-
it's a classic locked door situation. Like, only open twice. First time when Ibudon checked in, second time when the killer left. Right. So when did the killer get in? Did he come in with Ibudon? If so, why did he kill Ibudon? Um, yeah, they established a good number of things about the case
yeah,
besides that
it's
of
things like no one could have beamed into the holosuite. There was no evidence of it. Uh,
how to know the anatomy of a Bjoran.
Yeah, and
Uh,
they also are taking DNA samples to see who else has been in there. However, what we they basically their idea is okay, we'll take DNA samples, and because I believe the hollow suites are cleaned between every use, we kind of know why they're hollow suites, especially in Quark's place. But as a result,
mhm,
the only DNA in there would be Ibudon's, Odo's, Kira, and Cisco, because those are and Bashir, because those are the characters that are currently investigating it. So any other DNA would be the killer.
right.
Yeah,
Because
and
they're not prepared for a murder investigation, so they just come in like with none of the gear on to prevent contamination.
well,
Yep.
I guess like well, they're checking the whole hollow suite. So even in like real
Mm.
life, you wouldn't be able to prevent all that form of contamination. Well, and then again, this is a sci-fi future. Yeah, they probably should have some suits. But I mean, look, if you're good enough at tracking DNA, then you could easily just be like, yeah, we know it's you. I
Listen,
assume they don't think it's going to be Cisco, Bashir, Kira, and Odo. Admittedly, Odo is going to kind of be blamed going forward.
yeah,
And the
which
implication is because he's in this room now, you can't rule out that his DNA wasn't in there beforehand. Which does he
yeah,
even have
it's
DNA? He's a liquid creature. Whatever his version of DNA is.
yeah. Listen, here's the thing. The reason why I'm anal about it is you made me watch Dexter, okay? And now it's like, well, how do you prevent? Like, it's just like, yeah, you don't want to contaminate the crime scene.
Well, I mean
Like, so,
that's just general life. Yeah, you got to be careful about contaminating a crime scene. But even in real life, right? If someone went to a crime scene And we were like, oh, well, we found a hair from this person at the crime scene. It's like, oh, well, it was one of the people who was collecting evidence. Like, yeah, that's possible. They don't always wear like hairnets and like, you know,
Hmm.
decontamination suits. Maybe they should, but they don't because you're going to have a lot of people going about the scene anyway. So as long as you can just find evidence that's not supposed to be there, it's a little bit more complicated. But
Hmm.
yeah, so this is basically the start of the investigation. And let's see, what else do they have in terms of like what do they say here? Yeah, the door only opened twice. No one beamed in. Yeah, they haven't. Do you even need decent knowledge of Bajoran anatomy? I guess they only did stab once, so they would need to know where like the Bajoran heart or vital organ is.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I
like
guess that's the case. It's almost a weird thing to talk about because I don't think it's ever mentioned if Bajorans are really that different from humans. Like it's not
uh
like they say it's like, oh well, Bajorans have like two smaller versions of a heart located in different locations. But it's not like they're anything weird. Like if you asked
right.
me, hey, do you want to kill a Bajoran? I'd be like, well, I mean, if you stab like once or twice, you're probably gonna in the chest, you're probably gonna kill him. I mean, I don't know what else, but
The
apparently,
way you worded that wasn't. Oh, do you know how to kill a Bajoran? You said, would you like to kill a Bajoran? It's like, well, if you stab him in the chest, it's like, it's not that you're against killing. You want a specific way to kill them. When I know for a fact you meant it in the sense of like, how would you kill a Bajoran? Like,
no.
oh my, no, no, we're not talking about murdering Bajorans. No, 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 no,
All right.
no.
We'll talk about the like Cardassian Prime Directive later. But yeah, so we get more. Let's see. Then they start looking at what ships are supposed to go in and leave the station because clearly, if someone murdered this guy, they don't want him leaving the station. So all ships have been informed of the delay. They're like, we get this is the next scene that's in ops, and they're basically stopping anyone from leaving. They're stopping anyone from trying to get off the station who might have been the killer.
Mhm.
And let's see. Oh yeah, this is where we also meet Mr. Zayra, who operates the Transit Aid Center. I don't really know what that's meant, but this is a guy who's just introduced for this episode. And
I think
yeah,
the
go on.
name, it just means like the guy who helped you schedule travel and such to and from the station.
Yeah, well,
Because it's
yeah,
like, oh,
he brings up that he had spoken with Ibudan the day before and said that after the conflict with Odo in Quark's bar, Ibudan had mentioned he was worried about Odo, that Odo might kill him, and now the guy's dead. This is where sort of the premise that Odo might have been the killer comes in, and I
yeah,
think the episode does a decent job at making the audience believe that. Spoiler alert: we know it's not Odo, but I
yeah.
think
I mean,
this is early
even
enough in the
without
series.
it,
This is early enough in the series that you could, in theory, believe that Odo was a criminal and he was going to be written out of the series at this point. He was a criminal and he goes to jail, but
I suppose, but my story, well, I mean, they did. Did Tasha Yar die at the end of season one of TNG, or was it like in
no,
season one? Season one.
I believe it was in season two. Hold on,
No.
what was the episode called?
When did Tasha Yar die?
It was against the evil
TNG.
ooze.
It's gonna be, yeah, first season.
Oh,
First
okay.
season.
Well, I mean, what
Yeah,
episode? What
so
episode was
it
it?
could have been out. Skin of Evil.
Yeah,
Uh,
but like what number?
God damn it. Hang on. I gotta.
All right.
Skin of
Either
Evil.
way, I'm pretty sure it was
Uh,
decently in to the first season.
23. 23.
Yeah, that's almost through the
Yeah.
whole first season. Like,
Yeah. So this would be very early, but still, like, it's possible. But here's the thing. I actually want to say something. The the fact of like, oh, he told me he was scared. He was afraid that Odo might kill him. It's like me, someone who's like kind of paranoid. It's like, okay, if you're afraid for your life, why did you go to a secluded like a place where others couldn't see you? You know what
yeah,
I mean?
I mean, that should probably. I don't think that really comes up in terms of how other characters look at the situation, but that might be something that's supposed to be a hint towards the audience. This guy feels that he is threatened by Odo. Why would he
Uh-huh.
seclude himself in a hollow suite?
Why would he come back to the station?
Well,
Why would
I
he?
don't think he ever left the station. Remember, he had 26 hours to leave, and I don't think
No, I
26
meant
hours
like
passed.
no, no, no. I meant like, oh, like in terms of why did he before he met Odo again? Why did he come back to the station? You know what I mean? It's never established.
I
It's
mean,
like,
like I think the timeline of events, right? He came back to the station because Maybe he had business here. Maybe he just likes the station. I don't know. But
Maybe.
maybe he wanted to visit Quark's bar. But then he's
I mean,
told
Quark is
then he's
great.
told he has 26 hours to leave. He talks to this guy saying that he's worried about Odo. The guy says after an hour after I talked to him, he was found dead. So that seems like a pretty logical thing to happen. I guess the issue would be if this guy was legitimately afraid Odo would kill him, why wouldn't he leave the station?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's something
Also,
that's a little bit suspicious.
yeah, and he said it to the transit aid guy.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
mean
like, why?
he could have gotten off the station easily.
Yeah. There's also I was gonna say something else about like how weird this is. Like there should have been warning, like immediately, like alarms going off. This is weird situation. What was I gonna say? Crap, I forgot. Never mind. Go
No,
ahead.
no problem.
Just
Anyway, so they uh they head into Ibudan's quarters, and
mhm.
we have
Oh, I remember. I'm
oh
sorry. I'm
no,
sorry.
go on,
I
go on.
remember. So Odo said, if you're not off of this in 24 hours, I you need basically it's like we know Odo. Now,
Well, he says
it's not so
I'll
far.
give you 26 hours to leave the station. The question is then, or else what?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is like whatever or else what is, I presume it's before those 26 hours are up. So it's weird that if Odo did kill him, that it would be before the 26 hours are up because Odo means what he says.
True.
Odo says something like, and he says it when he's angry, he means it.
Well, yeah,
Now he
true.
could.
So I guess the implication would be because remember we should look at this from also how Cisco kind of is looking at it because Cisco's the authority here.
Mhm,
Odo had a meeting with Cisco, and Cisco basically threatened to take away Odo's authority. He's like, "Look, if you can't
mhm,
play ball, if you can't play within the rules, I will find someone who can." If
mhm,
then an hour later this guy died, you could interpret that as Odo saw his ability to harm this guy later as being compromised, so instead he killed him now. But yeah, I agree with you. If you were someone who's like, look, I give you 26 hours or to get off the station, if you die within like 5 hours, people would be like, wait a minute, why would Odo give him 26 hours, lie about giving him 26 hours, and then kill him? That'd be a bit weird. Like, you, admittedly, we this is a lot of conflicted information. I don't think anyone can really piece together what the actual problem is at the moment.
mhm,
But we do get to
mhm,
Ibadan's quarters. Odo and another Bajoran security officer are walking in there, and let's see, Cisco basically goes onto his computer and checks the logs, and
mhm.
the logs basically confirm that there's a lot of personal calendar files, and one of them says like, oh yeah, departed Alderaan. Is it really Alderaan spaceport? Maybe it's a Star Wars reference.
Yeah, it's a Star Wars reference. There's also
Neat, neat,
a reference to Robert Del Santina, one of the guys who is like a production manager for for DS9 in the
neat.
they pretty yeah, similar stuff happened in TNG, folks. Like there's actually a lot of anime references in TNG because nerds.
Oh,
They're nerds.
interesting.
Yeah.
I did not know that,
Hmm.
but it's interesting. So Quark goes to his computer, and there's all these different files. One of which is the last file that was created was listed as Odo. So Odo kind
Hmm.
of looks at that. It's a little bit mysterious. I think Odo kind of realizes he is in a situation where he is quite quickly becoming the easiest person to blame.
Yeah, and it didn't
Yeah,
look good.
he has a little bit of a look on his face. It's hard to see it, but he's definitely uncomfortable. He's like, oh man, this is not going to look good.
Yeah.
Admittedly, we don't see sort of the stereotypical thing of Odo then trying to cover the tracks because that would just make him look more guilty, I think. But
Right.
he basically doesn't do anything with this information right here quite yet. We get back with Cisco, and let's see. Yeah, Cisco is having. Oh, this is where we have Cisco and Keiko talking. So we've already discussed that. Yeah, we're back in the infirmary. But this is where Bashir sort of reveals that there was no other DNA traces found in the holosuite except the ones of the people who were initially found the body.
Hmm.
So, yeah, this is where Kira raises. Ibudan went to the holosuite alone, locked the door. Nobody transports in. A few minutes later, he's murdered. How is that possible? And this is where we find something very interesting. Odo comes in and he says it's not unless the murder was committed by someone who can get through the cracks of the door, say a shapeshifter. Odo,
Yeah.
Odo pretty much accuses himself of this.
Yeah.
I find this line a little bit weird. I guess I guess the implication is he is trying to he is drawing attention to something that everyone's going to have the logical conclusion to get to, and he's trying to get ahead of it because we know Odo would know he didn't do this. I guess I just
Yeah,
wonder
and
why
he's
he would have to bring it up, especially so publicly. If this was me, I would basically go to Cisco and I would say, "Look, Commander, uh, I know I had a conflict with this guy beforehand. He had a file on me listed as my name. I understand the evidence is pointing towards me. I didn't do this. I wouldn't just say this in front of half your crew.
yeah, it's a little awkward that he says it right there in front of everyone,
Yeah, because
but I think
Jadzia, I mean, Kira might be like, yeah, Odo would never have done this. But Jadzia and Bashir are both there. They don't really
yeah,
know Odo that well yet.
but I'm sure Odo knows them well enough to be like, oh, they're gonna figure that out quick and might jump to a conclusion.
I mean,
I need
sure,
like,
that's possible, but I guess, like, why help them jump to that conclusion? You know, like, I understand the idea of trying to get ahead of it. I think what I would have preferred happen is Odo basically, talks to Kira separately. He's like, look, I understand the evidence is pointing towards me, but I didn't do this. Right? So that's when he and Kira would basically have to decide what to do next. Now, I'm not saying they tamper with evidence or anything like that. All I guess I'm suggesting is Odo should be very careful about what he says and how that might incriminate him. But he blatantly just incriminates himself right here. I'm not going to lie, this almost sounds like a confession. So I just find it a little odd. But I mean, the next thing we hear is, we have the next scene where Odo says, like, it's a really nice package, isn't it? Like, everything seems to be working in favor of accusing me.
yep.
So maybe and this is a conversation explicitly between Odo and Kira. This is kind of what I imagine would have happened first. So, Kira is basically comes to the conclusion that, both of them sort of agree someone is trying to frame Odo. It's too neat of a package. Like, if Odo really did want to murder somebody, he wouldn't have done it this way because it would obviously be him. Is kind of the issue.
Yeah. Also, fun fact, I think this is the first time we get mention of the greatest Odo secondary character, the Bucket.
True. We do get a mention of the Bucket. So let's see. Odo basically knows that he has to return to his natural state every 18 hours, where he goes back into his room and sleeps in a bucket.
Yeah, I was in a pail in the back of my office. Does
Yeah.
he not have a place to live before this? I mean, I know later on he has quarters, but right now it's just like, bucket in my office.
Again, this is the hyper pragmatic Odo. I don't think he really cares, regardless of where he sleeps. But I remember there's a joke. I think it's in the next few episodes. I think where Quark basically mentions you can get a platinum pressed bucket, like effectively like a gold pressed bucket. It's like, and Odo almost seems convinced by that. He's like, ooh, like I can have a really nice bucket to sleep in. But it's interesting that they do sort of provide this limitation. This does become kind of an important plot element with a lot of smaller things. But Kira does ask, is there anyone who might want to frame me for murder? And Odo says, I can think about 500 different people off the top of my head. I haven't really seen any of them around this station lately, so it's just kind of funny. Odo is a very paranoid guy, it seems, but also he's a guy who's made his fair share of enemies. Maybe he deserves to be paranoid.
Well, yeah, like he's law enforcement, and he's very like he enforces. He doesn't let people slip. He's not someone you can play ball with. You are the ball, and he's gonna home run you right out of the park.
Well,
Like,
yeah, we also do get it happened in the previous scene. We didn't mention it, but for some reason, Ibudan's quarters was a 2-bedroom, basically. And they're like, why would he be a 2-bedroom? Was he traveling with someone? It's like, he wasn't traveling with anybody. And they comment, maybe he just wanted more space. You're limited. You're limited on what rooms you can probably have in a space station. So maybe you want the double bedroom one because you want the extra space and you have the money. But Kira basically does say, it's like, look, I'm going to try and find out if anyone else was using that second bed. Because if someone else was there, that would be a huge clue as to who might have killed Ibudan. And I don't know. I like this scene. I think this is probably the scene where Odo should have talked about the fact that he is, he's a perfect suspect for this. Because again, Kira immediately rejects the idea that Odo did this. Like, she doesn't even entertain the idea. She doesn't seem suspicious. She doesn't seem questioning of Odo and his motivations. As far as she's concerned, right? Like, someone is framing you. Yeah. So I think this is how I would have preferred it, because we know these two are at least friendly, if not outright friends right now. I wouldn't have incriminated myself in front of two Federation officers I don't know yet. I would have brought this up to Kira first, And then whatever she says, then we kind of maybe it's like, okay, we need to bring in Cisco or someone and talk to them about how this is affecting us.
Mhm.
But yeah, there's also kind of the issue of the second Odo incriminates himself, he should be removed from the investigation, which they
Yeah,
kind of do.
immediately.
Believe he asks to be removed from it later, but I'm not gonna lie. It once that he incriminates himself, Cisco should really kind of come down and say, "Look, then I got to remove you from this because you're a suspect."
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and let's see, we return back to. Oh yeah, we return.
Echo.
Yeah, we have Keiko talking to Rom, Nog's dad, Quark's brother,
Okay, the brother.
and we have an interesting little character building stuff with her and Ron. Rom, I keep saying Ron. Rom doesn't want his boy to go to Federation school. Keiko's basically trying to sell him on it, and her argument is like, look, your son will be well ahead of the game of other Ferengi if he knows how other cultures raise their kids and how they think. He'll be able to sell stuff to them, basically, and that's the thing that convinces Rom.
Yeah,
It almost convinces Rom. I don't think he commits to it in this scene. But he
yeah.
asks, "Oh, you'll teach my son these things?" And she's like, "Knowledge is power, Mister Rom." He's like, "It won't work." And she's like, "Why?" He's like, "Because you are a female, and my son would never listen to a female." And I think
Yeah,
this might
well,
be. This is. I don't think this is the first example where we learned that Ferengi do not have any respect for women. But this is probably the most. I think this is the first time it's happened in DS9.
mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So yeah, like oh, wait, we didn't get another scene. Oh yeah, we get a really nice scene after this because you have some people who are in Quark's bar. They're talking about Odo. They're like, what do we know about him anyway? It's like he isn't one. He isn't one of anything. They keep sort of commenting. It's like he totally could have done it, and he's made chief of security. He was chief of security when the Cardassians here. He's not a good guy. And then we have Quark come in, and we all know how Quark. We now know how Quark and Odo interact. So when Quark says nobody knows him like I know him, let me tell you something. He's an ill-tempered, overbearing crosspatch, but he was no Cardassian collaborator, and he's no killer. This is a phenomenal scene. This scene alone is probably what makes the episode for me. The fact that
Yeah,
like Odo's essentially mortal enemy in the form of Quark would go out of his way to criticize some of his customers and say, "Don't be talking about this. He's not your guy."
don't talk shit about my officer. Only he gets to arrest me.
Oh yeah, and then
Uh,
Zyra basically says, "I can't believe you're defending him, Quark. He's your worst enemy." And Quark says, "Like, I guess that's the closest thing he would have to a friend." I don't
yeah.
know. This is such a great interaction between these two because I don't think there's ever a single scene in DS9 where Quark and Rom are directly, or I'm sorry, Quark and Odo are directly friendly to one another, but there is this almost friendly respect between them.
I think they come up. It's just like they're not coming to mind at the moment. But
Well, I
it's
don't
one of
mean
those things
what I
of
mean is
like,
like when any time that they're somewhat friendly, there's like this cover of they're insulting one another.
yeah,
They're not doing anything that would anyone would look at this and be like these people hate each other. But I do think there's a lot of respect between the two, even if they disagree on 99% of things. And Quark does not like the fact that Odo is basically being accused of this.
yeah,
It's just it's a really nice scene. I really do like this scene. So I don't know. I think this scene probably makes the episode for me. Then we get a scene where Bashir. I mean, we get a bit of a weird scene. It's just Bashir going through the room, vacuuming all the samples,
da, da, da,
and he
da.
seems very fascinated with some of the samples by the trash chute. That
Mhm.
is going to come up later. It's a bit weird because there's actually no dialogue in that scene. Let me check
Yeah,
my
it's just
note. Let
like
me check
he
my
knows
notes.
something, but he doesn't say anything. It's
Yeah, it's just I'm trying to see if I have any notes about that in my scene or in my notes. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I guess the music is sort of alluding that something is coming up from this.
yeah,
Yeah, and then let's see. Cisco is talking to Zyra again. Zyra's really just the antagonist of this episode. He's basically saying like, we're not saying he's innocent or guilty. All we want is that he's removed from the investigation. Kira's not really hearing too much about this, but Cisco's like, look, we kind of gotta listen to them on that. They're not wrong. He shouldn't be investigating this if he's a suspect.
yeah,
So, we have another sort of conflict between Kira and Cisco. Uh, it's like Dax even brings up the fact that even if he's innocent, he could still be a conflict of interest. And again, Kira is not happy about this. Again, Kira is probably, Odo's best friend, outside of Quark.
yeah.
But
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's just it's just an element of I like that she's defending him, and it kind of goes even further to the fact that he really should have brought this up to her before he revealed it to everyone else. The fact that he is very clearly a someone to be accused of. Although it does prove the fact that even though Odo sort of outs himself as a potential suspect, the rest of the station seems to have come to that conclusion on their own. Like
Yeah.
even with the guy saying like, "Look, you didn't like this guy and he turns up dead. It's a bit suspicious." And then people start putting
This
pieces together.
trusty.
So Odo's probably right in revealing it, showing that he's not trying to hide that fact or ignore it.
Hmm.
So this is where we get some more technobabble stuff. Bashir found some sort of weird substance by the trash chute, and he doesn't know what it is, but they're basically some sort of weird cells that don't belong to any one person, like some sort of DNA cells. And he's basically going to start using it to grow it into something because it's going to turn into something that'll hopefully solve this case.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that comes up a little bit later. They're weird. They're called they're complex proteins that are useful for breaking down DNA fragments. He doesn't really know what they are, but he's going to try and use these to try and figure out what they're for.
Yeah.
Let's see. Yeah, then we get the scene where Cisco relieves Odo of duty, and Odo is like, who'll be taking over the investigation? Cisco basically says like, "Yep, Major Kira and Lieutenant Dax," and then Odo's just like, "Will that be all?" Cisco basically has to reaffirm to him, it's like, "Look, I don't personally believe that you did this." And Odo seems like almost surprised. He's like, "Really? Uh, Now how can that be true? You don't know me. You have no reason to believe that I wouldn't kill Ibudan if it suited my fancy. So don't tell me that there isn't some doubt inside you, some question about whether or not I murdered the man." And
Hmm.
let's see. Cisco basically says, I'm just taking you off the case for your own best interests. And Odo says, I'll take care of my own best interests. This is an interesting
Hmm.
scene because, even though Cisco's trying to, be cordial with Odo, Odo again doesn't like that pretense. He knows
Hmm.
Cisco has no reason to trust him. Cisco has no reason to be his friend. If Odo is found out to be guilty of this crime, Cisco will arrest him himself. Right? There's no element here that Odo believes kind of the fancy words that Cisco's throwing out. "Look, I'm doing this for your sake. I'm doing this to help you." And Odo's like, "No, you're not. You're doing this because this is what you're supposed to be doing."
He only brought it up because so Odo didn't even question it. He's just like, "Will that be all, Commander?" And Cisco, the one who brought it up, and Odo's like, real like that's sort of like I feel like if it wasn't said, like Odo would be like, uh, because how to put it, like the fact Cisco has to say it, I think that's what tells Odo like really, really, uh,
Yeah, I mean,
because
again, there is this pretense where Cisco doesn't want to outright accuse Odo, but he has to remove him
yeah,
from the case because he's a suspect. So he's like, "Look, I'm not gonna accuse you of this." And Odo again doesn't like this pretense. He doesn't like that. He's like, "Look, you don't know me at all. This is the fourth episode. If we go by sort of standard Star Trek rules, there's an there's a like I believe because if you have like 22, 23 episodes a season, and a season's supposed to be about a year, that means you're basically having a conflict every other week. So by
yeah,
episode 4, they've known each other for about 2 months. It's been
uh, yeah,
yeah, it's about a month, little bit more. Well, technically, the first episode happens in a very short period of time, so they've known each other for probably a month, less than two. So Odo doesn't like the fact that Cisco's sort of saying these paltry words, "Oh, I don't believe you did it." And you get this like really intense scene where the camera's zooming in on his face, and he's like, "You don't know I didn't murder a man." So it's an interesting scene. Again, it kind of also goes to that sense of Odo looks at things in a very black and white way. He doesn't like Cisco kind of taking that smaller, even if you did it, I don't believe, even if you're the most likely option, I don't personally believe it. As far as Odo, I think looks at it is like, you need to be doing an investigation. Don't be taking some random feelings you might have and compromising the investigation with that. It's about
yeah,
achieving justice here, not about being nice to people. So I don't know.
yeah.
It's interesting. There's a lot of character stuff that we see for both people, and it's not a bad scene. We then see his Odo walking the promenade, and people are sort of throwing jeers at him. You know,
That's him.
he's the one who did
He
it.
found.
He changes into us and then steals our women.
Don't say that. Oh my god. No.
Yeah, I'm
Uh,
just making a joke. But yeah, people don't trust him. They don't trust the fact that he's a shapeshifter. And,
yeah.
they basically say that's him. They found his DNA. He basically is trying to ignore it, but it does seem to kind of be getting to him. And then Quark shows up
Mhm.
at the security office to say hi to Odo because these guys are just best friends. Quark basically is like, "Look, I can find out who did it for you." And Odo says, "Not for me. Tell it to Starfleet. I'm not in charge of it any longer." And Quark's like, "Well, now there's a piece of good news to brighten my day." Again, while they might have some respect for one another, both characters are just going to be as mean as they can to one another. It's just their
Oh yeah.
relationship. Odo says you better take advantage of this while you can, Quark. Quark's like, "Oh, I will. Count on it. I'll have every confident man, or hold on, confidence man in the sector on board by tomorrow." Let's see. Odo gets mad. He's like, "You'll do and I'll what?" And then Quark interrupts him. This is where Odo is basically just like, Odo's kind of mad. He's lost some of his power.
Mm.
And Odo
Yeah.
and then he kind of relents. He's like, "Look, you're gonna get sloppy without me keeping an eye on you." Quark's like, "Ah, you've trained me too well. It's like I've been on my toes for too long." Let's see.
Mm.
Oh yeah, and there's kind of this funny interaction where Odo basically like leans against his desk, like, "So, think you could use a shapeshifter in your organization?" And like, like Quark almost seems like a little bit like off foot, like, "Wait, what?" He's like, "Oh, you almost had me." It's a fun little
I did.
it's a fun little scene. It's like,
Yeah.
you almost had me, and then Odo kind of gives him a smile. It's like, I did, didn't I? I did almost get you. Like, I don't
It's
know.
like
This is
just
the nicest they've been to each other. I don't know. It's funny. They're joking at each other.
this just fits in with Odo like loving the mess with Quark because like Odo like it comes up later in a certain episode, but Odo genuinely like a Quark is like his daily challenge, and it's a
Hmm.
good sort of challenge. It's great. Like even if he like despises criminals like Quark, Quark is fun for him,
Yeah,
and it's just like
I mean, there's also the element of Quark is kind of not that bad of a guy, even though he does sort of bad things. Like Quark doesn't murder people. He smuggles
right.
stuff. He probably pulls a lot of. He probably tries to sell illegal things. What a lot of people could probably argue are somewhat victimless crimes. So maybe Odo kind of like
Yeah,
looks at it as, you're a bad guy, but you're also not like outright dangerous, and you do have some
yeah,
element of a moral compass. You do have a line that you won't cross, which maybe that's what Odo respects about it.
yeah.
We do
Because
yeah, go on.
the one time he does do something that is like, oh, there are gonna be victims of this. Odo's kind of with the others and like, we don't respect you anymore for doing what you're doing,
Yeah, I mean
even
that's
though
true.
it's
We do get to an episode where Quark seems to cross a line, and that does have a similar change. That does create a change in their dynamic. We do get
yeah.
the scene sort of caps off where Quark admits that he's been doing some asking around about the prison that Ibudan went to, trying to find if Ibudan had some sort of co-conspirators that he's been interacting with. They just say that he
Mhm.
basically stayed around Bajoran dissidents, the Cardassians locked up, and that's it. So there's not really
Yeah.
much to go. They're not getting anything from the prison, but I
Oh,
think it says a lot that without being prompted, Quark did his own research to try and help. Again, like
mhm.
Quark likes Odo. They're friends, even though they butt heads. Like they'll never admit they're friends. They're always gonna butt heads, but they're pretty much like, they're on each
Each
other's.
other's.
They're in each other's corner, even if it's reluctantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. Here's the thing. Odo knows how Quark works. Quark knows how Odo works, and they can work with each other in terms of like keeping the peace between them.
True. I mean, and
It's
remember, Quark is the community leader right now.
the community leader.
That never
What
really
a
comes up,
great.
but remember, he's community leader. He has some degree of power here. He's the head of
I,
he's the head of the, I don't know, the what would you call all the.
Ramadan Merchants Association. I think they bring it up at one
Huh.
point.
Well, all right. I wasn't sure if it was gonna be merchants or just like because.
Oh, one time. It comes up one time later on in the series when certain people come to the station and they have to have a welcoming party of Odo, Kira, and Quark. Because right there, it's like, Kira's a representative for the Bajorans, Odo's a security officer, and then the people who live on the station who run the businesses, Quark.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, anyway, then we get the scene where we have Bashir, Cisco, and Dax studying more of the DNA. Apparently, it's growing into something. It's like a little lump of flesh on a table. uh,
mhm,
but they
mhm.
don't know what it is yet. They think it's the key to solving this. The scene ends a little bit comedically where Cisco asks Dax if she cares for lunch. Bashir, kind of misreading the circumstance, agrees, and then Dax says, "Oh no, thank you. I gotta go give a report to Kira." So now Cisco and Bashir are in an awkward lunch together. Like they basically have to like, "Oh crap, we agreed to lunch, but now the person that we wanted to have lunch with is not here anymore."
Yep.
It's a little funny. But yeah, we get the scene in Cork's bar. This is kind of like a weird underlying like C plot that's in the story. So Bashir and Cisco are basically having a conversation. They're talking about Dax, and Bashir comments like, "How many lives do you think she's lived?" And Cisco comments that when he was talking to Curzon and even when he talks to Jadzia, they seem to almost not know. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6. Again, they're being very vague on this on purpose, but it also seems that maybe it's hard to probably parse all these lives into separate units. You know, it's like
Yeah,
once
it's
you have
very
all these
complex.
experiences, how do you separate them? Would probably be a big issue.
Yeah.
And Bashir asks like, "Oh, how's she changed that much?" Cisco doesn't really think she's changed really at all. But it's like this is kind of where we get the conclusion for how Cisco views Jedzia, and I don't know. I find it a little bit nice. He's like Cisco basically comments. He's like, "Look, I'm gonna have to figure out how she's changed. Let's see. If I were to tell you some of the mischief that I got into with when we were Curzon, it would change how you look at Dax. Or it would change how you look at Jedzia. Let's see. I'm trying to find like the specific line. Uh, oh yeah, Bashir says like, if I were you, if I were in your shoes, knowing Dax as intimately as you do, I'd find it hard to resist. And Cisco says, you don't understand. Dax used to beat me regularly at bare fist Juro counterpunch. And I
I
think
love how earlier in the episode he mentions like you are like a mentor, you were like a father figure to me. And it's like now we have him saying Dax used to beat me regularly. It's just like
all right, well, I find it interesting because as the conversation goes on, you have Cisco kind of coming to the terms that Curzon and Jedzia are different people, even if Dax is the same person. And
yeah.
I mean, it's kind of nice. Again, there's a very interesting dynamic where Cisco is sort of being a mentor to Jadzia the person, but he was a mentee to Curzon, and Dax links those two together in a very weird way for him. But over the course of this
Mhm.
conversation, he seems to get happier and happier as he talks about them. And again, as he sort of finishes the line, he differentiates Curzon and Jedzia as different people. He doesn't
Mhm.
have the same feelings he has for Jedzia as he had for Curzon because they're different people. Curzon used to, beat him in a fight as like a, when they would bare knuckle brawl, and he would never do that with Jedzia, even though we later learned that she's a very capable fighter in her own right. But it's interesting. It's interesting how we see these characters, how over the course of this conversation, how he talks about them is different. He starts off
Mhm.
mentioning, mostly he's like, let's see, how does he? Yeah, he talks about Dax as if Dax was the person at like in the start of the conversation. He's like Dax loves the races, but when he finishes it, he's talking specifically about Curzon. So there is that level of how is it that he's referring to this person and how does he look at them? It's probably something he's still gonna have to deal with over time, but I don't know. It's interesting. I've
Yeah.
probably talked a little bit too much on that, but I don't know. It's weird. Again, I don't like the troll that much, but I guess I like this interaction between him and Jadzia. Yeah,
We don't like underlying issues. It's just like but seeing how people come to terms with
it's
it
a
is
cool
interesting.
sci-fi concept where you're dealing with someone who has multiple lifetimes, but at the same time is I believe like 28 years old. Right?
Yeah.
Jadzia is 28 years old, doesn't really have that much in the way of life experience, especially in a world where people live regularly to 140. She's a baby, so it's very weird, especially probably for him. Who do we know when he met Curzon? Like how old was he? Was still in Starfleet Academy, right?
I think so. Hang on. To memory beta I go, folks.
Well, regardless, it sounds like he knew Curzon for a very long time, and that meant that Curzon was someone who shaped him into the person he was.
Found it.
Yeah, how old was he?
Uh he was still in he hadn't graduated yet, but he was assigned to Pelio Station as an ensign. So more likely, how later on a certain someone, gets assigned to like field
Yeah,
duty
yeah.
of like, hey, this is part of yeah. That's where he met Curzon Dax.
All right.
He
Well,
met and
yeah, that's pretty nice then. Um,
yeah.
But yeah, so we return. This is where we get the schoolroom. Keiko's mostly setting it up. O'Brien's being supportive. Let's see. It's just a cute scene where we see like them interacting with their daughter. I don't think anything
Mm-hmm.
too much comes up with this scene. Let's see. I'm trying to look through the transcript. Yeah, I mean, this is just a nice little scene between the two people. Oh, and then we hear shouting outside, someone yelling "murderer," and we find on the promenade Odo is being followed by a crowd of people who are they're in a lynch mob at this point. Uh,
Yeah.
they get kind of a joke later. How do you wrap a noose around a shapeshifter's neck? They're a lynch mob,
Yeah.
100%. They're trying to lynch this guy, and
Yeah.
yeah, O'Brien calls the staff to the promenade to try and solve this issue. And I think this keeps going until Cisco shoots a phaser into the sky or into the
Yeah.
air, which I don't know how that works, but I wouldn't just be firing a phaser inside a space station unless I knew what my target was.
Man, you're gonna hate some episodes later on. You're
Yeah,
gonna hate some of.
yeah, but people are yelling "shifter, shifter," and I'm trying to find if there's any big lines the mob says other than the fact that oh yeah, they're like, oh, you're condemning him just because you don't because he's different from you, and Zyra says no, we're condemning him because of the evidence, which I'm not gonna lie is a fair argument. They don't hate. Maybe they're more willing to believe the evidence is damning because they know he's a shapeshifter, but they're not condemning him because he's a shapeshifter. They're condemning him because the evidence says it has to kind of be him.
So, I mean, yes, but here's the thing: they're now trying to take the law in their own
Oh
hands
yeah,
before
no,
it's been.
I'm not justifying them on that
Like,
part, but I guess it presents the
here's
interesting
the thing.
argument. Yeah, go on.
Here's the thing, though.
Hmm.
We know it's like not just the evidence because they were bringing up earlier, like, oh, he could be a Kardashian collaborator and such. Like, they say here in public, like, oh, it's because the evidence points that way. Whenever there's a lynch mob, folks, generally speaking, it's not because of justice.
Look,
Like,
I mean, I don't
that's
disagree with you. I think part of the issue is they see that Odo is not locked up. He is the highest likely candidate for the culprit, and I mean, even if he's taken off the
but
case, he's still just around the station. And yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. There is an element of he worked with the Cardassians in the past. Bajorans have no love for him there. He supposedly killed
But
someone that a lot of Bajorans view as a hero. So there's no love. There's no. These people are probably very emotionally charged right now. But I don't know. I guess I like the idea that they reject the notion that they're just doing this because he's a shapeshifter, even though their chant against him is shifter, shifter. It's like,
yeah, like. uh, like the only thing that could have made it worse for like, oh, why are they doing it, and it just being a personal attack on him is if if we ever saw someone being like they're doing it just because at one point they had trouble with Odo in the past because let's be fair, if you were like someone who occasionally got in trouble with the law and you found out like, oh, the chief of police, the one who arrested you or whatever, is the primary suspect, you would be thinking, hmm.
yeah, and
Maybe
we
that.
also get like a weird shot of a strange man just sort of watching over all of this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
which that's the one guy.
yeah,
You know who it is.
that guy's relevant. We see Bashir inside we see inside the medical area, and it turns out the tiny little lump of flesh has grown into more or less a body. It looks like it's a large, weird, fleshy body, and this is where Bashir
Yeah.
realizes what it is. So it is a clone. It is a clone of Ibudan, and this is where they sort of conclude that Ibudan somehow cloned himself, killed the clone to fake his death and to blame Odo for it.
Hmm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
and then kind of going a little bit further, they hold on, yeah, the bearded man, like I just had on screen briefly, who's like mysteriously looking over the crowd. He goes into a room, and then it turns out Odo was one of the chairs in the corner, and he accuses. His name is Lemonet, which apparently was an old alias of someone who Ibudan had met. Apparently, let's see, what does he say? Oh yeah, the person he's actually using the name for, he is someone who no, I'm sorry, it wasn't an alias. It was someone who died in the prison. So he
Yeah,
knew this
because
guy. Yeah, he knew this guy was dead in the prison. So he faked his identity, created a clone of himself, killed the clone, and Odo saw this on I guess a ship a ship docking like document, or I guess what would you call those? Just like a crew manifest. Yeah, like
It's says pastoralist, and specifically the name he used was the name of a scientist who was arrested by the Cardassians for conducting experimental research into this type of cloning. So that means Ibudan met him in prison. The guy probably died or something,
got his
but
research
before
or
that,
something.
yeah, and then like used it to execute this plot to get revenge against Odo, who arrested him for killing Cardassian. Yeah, it's basically everything that's been brought up. It ties neatly into a bow now of like, oh, like all the aspects that come up of
Yeah.
like, oh, you hung out with Bajoran dissidents, one of which was this, and you found that out from Quark and such.
Yeah, and one thing I find interesting, and we commented on it, like about how weird it was. So to kind of solve what this case is doing, they had to grow effectively a clone. And there's a line where it's like, what happens to this clone that we're growing? Odo mentions, and Bashir's like, look, in 2 days it becomes a living, breathing member of Bajoran society. And then Odo's like, well, let's hope it doesn't follow in its donor's footsteps. So they're just gonna like let this clone go.
Oh yeah, it's it's
It's just
technically a separate.
Yeah, I mean, like
Yeah.
it's a separate being. It's just it's kind of weird. You grow this clone. Well, you don't know what it is, so you start growing it, and then once it's a clone, they're just like, all right, have fun in society. I'm like, dude, that seems a little bit reckless. I don't know who this like. I don't know what this clone's I don't know what this clone's intelligence is. Does it have the intelligence of the person it was cloned from, or is it basically like a baby? Like, does it have a baby intelligence? It hasn't. Does it know the language?
There has to be clone social services. There has to be clone social services.
Look, have you been cloned and your clone and you haven't been able to take care of your clone? Well, we have clone social services. We'll teach him all the skills he needs. It's just like it's weird because I presumably here's my thought. I guess if the clone has all the intelligence and know-how of the person it's cloned from, sci-fi bullshit, right? Then it's effectively Ibudan. You're just releasing the guy who did this into the wild again. I know it's a clone; it's a different entity. Like, not getting into that conversation. This guy is still dangerous. Odo would not be happy letting this clone go.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, hey, you know that guy we just arrested for faking his death? Yeah, the clone that's exactly like him is out there now. And I'm like, oh, that's worrisome, I guess. Like, I guess he hasn't done anything yet, but it's still like he's going to do something probably if he's the exact same person essentially. But if it's
Watch
not,
it just become a running plot line throughout the story. Every season, there's an Ibudan clone on the loose
I mean,
again.
they could have done that, but yeah, there's no, we never hear from it again. But I guess the issue is just like, okay, if it is its own person, it doesn't have the exact personality traits. Does it have all the knowledge of the person? Because again, like if you made a copy of me with all my knowledge and stuff like that, it'd probably be exactly like me. Now, if it doesn't have my knowledge, it doesn't have the knowledge of my language, it doesn't have the knowledge of, my career, it doesn't have the knowledge of my friends. It doesn't have anything, and they're just releasing it into the world. I'm like, that seems a little reckless. I mean,
on social service.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to find some sort of like, oh yeah, we give it to a research institute that deals with this kind of problem every once in a while because everyone wants to, like, we get like 300 people a year who try and clone themselves and don't know what to do with the clone. So we're a service that takes them and makes sure they have the skills necessary to go out into the world. But it's just weird. They had this as a plot. They had it as a plot line, and they're like, "Well, what do we do with it? Oh, we're just gonna let it go." I'm like, "Okay." No one has complaints about that. No one has any concerns about releasing a clone out there into the world who has knowledge of cloning, presumably.
Well, the funny thing about what you said, like there has to be like a research thing. It's like I just imagine like like the weird thing I imagine is like the Department of Mysteries from Harry Potter, and it's the prophecy room, and they're just like, okay, you sit on this shelf all day with these other clones, just don't do anything stupid, and he's just stuck there kicking his legs down like, I got no dad, I got no mom, just a clone amongst clones. I'm sorry, it's
No,
just.
I mean, yeah, and then so this guy gets arrested, and that's more or less the end of the episode. We do get the nice finisher scene with the schoolroom. I'm trying to see. Well, before we get to that, yeah, we have Cisco give a log where he talks about the Bajoran authorities, hours into the clone gained consciousness, began new life. The perpetrators of the mob violence have retreated into their own businesses. I guess they don't suffer from any consequences.
Immediately that one who like is pretty clearly the fucking ringleader. His ass is up on inciting a mob like charges.
Well,
like,
they didn't do anything about it. Don't worry about it. And then he says like,
follow
You
it.
know, Cisco does comment, to my knowledge, Odo's received no apologies. Meanwhile, life in the station has begun to return to normal. That's the conclusion of that. It's a little bit of a dissatisfying conclusion, and I think that's why we probably don't give this episode that high of a rating. There's a few issues. We have the final scene where with Keiko. Oh, I didn't mention before when O'Brien went to visit her with the daughter. He gave her a little school bell. Saying how cute it would be if he saw his wife out there with a school bell ringing it for school, and she kind of thought that was funny too. So that was a nice little scene between husband and wife. And when we get to the school, we see the school bell there. No one's come to school except for Jake. It's just Jake who's there. However, right as the bell rings, Rom comes in dragging his son. He's like, "Look, sit down. No, not next to the human boy. I don't want you to have anything to do with him." And Rom basically kind of curtails to Keiko, says, "Look, we'll try it out for a few weeks." And then a few more. I think a few Bajoran students come in.
Yeah.
Yeah, a few Bajoran students come in, and the school seems to be working out at least for now. One thing that's interesting about that scene, at least, is you do have Rom basically saying the exact same thing Cisco does. I don't want you hanging out with that human boy. Where before we saw Cisco saying, "I don't want you hanging out with that Ferengi kid." So
yeah,
I mean, at this point, we know that Rom's not a very intelligent guy. We know that Rom is part of the Ferengi, which are not really shown to be morally upstanding. Maybe
by
that's
our standards.
Well, yeah, I think in general, but it's really kind of like I think there's an interesting comparison between Cisco and Rom here because Cisco had the same statements that Rom has, and we know Rom is not a good guy at this point in time. So
Yeah.
it's kind of maybe highlighting the fact that Cisco has a little bit of an issue with that. But again, I like that. I like that it's something that's we know there's an episode later on. I think it's this season that develops that. So it'll be good when we get to that episode. Or no, it's not this season. It's next season, I think. Because that's also I think the first season we meet the Vorta. But
yeah, Vorta is season 2, last episode. Because
and then, so ultimately, I ended up giving this episode. What did I give this episode? I ended up giving this episode a B plus. I think there's some good Odo scenes. I think it's more or less a complicated. It's more or less a complicated plot, but a lot of things sort of tie in together. I do agree with you. It's not weird, but the Cisco and Bashir conversations about Jadzia, the school plot line, all these things are very disjointed. There doesn't seem to be a cohesive through line, so this episode kind of becomes very jarring.
If it was just the
You had some weird audio thing right there. That's weird. Sorry, go on. You had some weird audio problem.
Okay, if it was just A plot, aka Odo, and then B plot, Keiko, I get the through line is learning to not fear each other, and how do we get to that point? Because A plot or learning to understand each other, because A plot is these people don't understand Odo and come to fear him. When you and we've seen Odo. I would if I recall when I first watched this episode, I was like, "There's no way he did this." Now that might have been poisoned by maybe I seen a later episode and saw Odo was still there, but it's one of those things we know Odo, and the crew knows Odo. He wouldn't do this, but the common people wouldn't, right? And it's like, okay, how do we overcome that sort? And then the answer is, as I brought up with the school, is you want people to accept each other. You need to start when they're young and show them have them have positive experiences, learning together. And then the third one, the Jadzia story is, well, what if you don't have that as an option? Instead, something radically has happened, and it's just to your friend, and that's just a part of their culture, right?
Actually,
and it's like
that's a really good point because I think there are probably comparisons to talk about with how people look at Odo and how people would look at Jadzia. They're a species that's very different from just the norm, like the Star Trek norm, right? Where most things are vaguely human with some differences. When you have something that's to the extreme, it's a bit weird. And then the school plotline kind of shows, ultimately to solve these problems, you need to solve it when they're kids. You need to have them interact with one another and learn from one another. And the Ferengi need to learn about the Federation species. This Federation species need to learn to interact with the Ferengi species for these problems to ever actually be solved. I guess that's a through line. I wouldn't say the through line is executed
they don't resolve together.
Yeah, they don't really resolve together. I don't think they're executed super well. I think the school plotline is, at most, it's kind of cute. It's kind of nice. I like seeing it, but it's not really super relevant. You could almost throw it into any episode, and it would fit.
Yeah.
again, I have some issues with how the whole Trill thing goes by, and it's not really given the time to breathe. Like, I feel like you can have a whole episode of Cisco dealing with his views of Jadzia.
Yeah.
I think that'd be like a whole episode worth of content where you have maybe the problem with Cisco is he views Jadzia like Curzon, and that's an issue. And then the end of the episode is he learns to view Jadzia as Jadzia. We don't really get that. We get like 3 scenes at most that's discussed. And I'll be 100% honest. I don't know if I like the interpretation that a lot of the lynch mob was going after Odo because he's a shapeshifter. Yes, they were yelling shifter, 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 but it's not like they were just doing this to this guy. They had legitimate reasons that you could cite for why they don't like him. Like if Odo was not a shapeshifter, well, he sided with the Cardassians. Like, people look at him as a Cardassian sympathizer. He worked with the Cardassians. He arrested a guy that they view as a hero, and he possibly killed that guy, and he's theoretically the only one who could have done it. I think there's probably a lot of people in there who, yeah, I mean, the evidence is pretty damning. This is not someone we like. It's not about him being a shapeshifter. It's about him kind of going against Bajorans because Odo has a higher sense of justice than just doing what is convenient.
So I say it's all of it. Like, different people have within the crowd have different motivations,
Of course.
and it's expressed. And what my point was, like, when we were discussing is when the guy says, like, "Oh, the evidence points to it," and it's like, yeah, but that's your excuse to act upon this, like,
No,
these feelings.
I guess I get that, right? I firmly believe there's probably a lot of people in that mob who are not comfortable with the weird shapeshifter guy who, like, enforces the laws on the station. But
who
I
might
guess
have worked with the Kardashians. And so that's what I'm not saying it's just because he's a shapeshifter. I'm saying it's all these like my issue wasn't with you're doing it because like he uses this excuse and like you and I can pretty much immediately agree like it's not just that like this is your excuse, but it's because as you said all these things, and you're saying your focus like in this situation. Hollis, you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm
okay,
not saying it's just because of him being a shapeshifter.
yeah,
And the reason why it might come across as that is like I probably pointed out when we were discussing it, like you're literally yelling about him being a shape shifting freak.
yeah.
But
I
I
agree.
agree with you.
I agree. I mean, I see what you're saying. I guess
Yeah.
I feel it would have thematically worked better if you didn't have all these other legitimate reasons they don't like him.
Yeah.
And because again, like I agree with you that there's like this neat little through line between the 3 episodes, between the 3 sort of plot lines, and I just feel the main plot line, that message is a little bit muddled because there's a different, not necessarily stronger, but still strong interpretation that there's like in theory if they weren't
about why.
yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I'm not gonna lie. I feel the fact that he sided with Cardassians is way more damning than the fact that he is like perfect for this crime and a shapeshifter. Like, we know how the Bajorans feel about Cardassians. So, like, if you heard, oh yeah, this guy, he arrested someone who smuggled medical supplies for Bajorans, you'd be like, oh, well, fuck that guy. Like, there's nothing that you could say to make me like him because he went against my people. When in reality, that was just Odo, who knew this guy more and who has a stronger sense of justice than just siding with one side. Odo looks at it as, justice is absolute. So people who don't look at it that way, or people who have more of a bias towards one side or the other, they're going to look at Odo as basically this traitor. And they wouldn't exactly be wrong from their perspective. He did, in a way, he sided with Cardassians on certain things when that was where justice lied. And I feel like that's just the stronger. I feel like that's a slightly stronger interpretation than the fact they don't like him for being a shifter. Shifter just seems to be the thing they circle around. And again, it's just I think it would have been stronger if the reason they were blaming him was a little bit more muddled. But it seems, I'm not gonna lie, if we don't have all that perspective that they do, they have just the general people perspective. They don't see the evidence. They don't see all this other stuff. They don't know Odo as well, like you kind of said. There's a level of, when you see this evidence stacking, you're going to develop a conclusion that he's doing that. And when he's not behind bars, you're sitting there like, well, is the Federation going to punish this criminal? Oh no, they're going to treat him the same way the Cardassians treated him, not punishing him for doing bad things. Fuck them. Like, we're going to take justice into our own hands. Admittedly, they're still wrong, but I guess I think it makes it a little bit harder to draw the same through line between the plot lines, because the main plot line is a lot more complicated and a lot more nuanced, which makes it harder to
Yeah.
slot in with those other ones. Whereas those other ones are pretty short and clear cut. Again, I think you could have given a lot more depth to both those other plot lines and done entire episodes on them. But we didn't get
Mhm.
that. We got very short, sweet plot lines for those that aren't good. I wouldn't say they're amazing, but they're not bad. And with this main one, there's a lot of nuance, so it's hard to mix those together and have it be a nice little package. But overall, I still
Yeah.
think it's a pretty decent episode. I mean, I'm willing to leave it at probably B plus. I'm willing to say that it's not my favorite episode. It's not an episode I probably come back to regularly, but I do think it's a pretty good Odo episode.
Yeah, I would put it at B plus. Like now that I thought of the through line, it's like okay, that partially rectifies my issue, but it's still not A because it's like it's not fully rectified because it's like we have three plot lines that are kind like could have been done separately, like and they connect them as well as they can, but there's
Yeah.
only as well as you.
Yeah.
Um,
All right, so I think that's a good stopping point. Pretty decent episode. One I wouldn't discourage someone from watching, but it's definitely not something I'd recommend first. We will return soon with the episode Babel. I think we're gonna have a lot to say about that one, although it won't be really intelligible.
uh, wait, is Babel next? Oh yeah, okay, it's
All
this
right,
episode.
Pike, quickly say something cool to sign us off on.
No.